do first is we're gonna take that big brush, big wide one, and we're gonna grab a bunch of black paint. And you can start anywhere on your canvas, just as long as you're doing side to side strokes. And we're gonna cover this whole canvas. And we're just gonna paint this entire thing black, and make sure not to lay the paint on too thick. You're gonna wanna spread it thin, that way it dries a bit quicker. So just make sure you cover the entire thing, spread it out nice and thin. And if you have to, go up and down just to make sure it gets in all the little grooves of your canvas, has that kind of fabric texture, so you gotta kind of move that paint around to get it all covered. Alrighty, so once you got your canvas just about all covered, it's okay if there's a little bit of white streaks on it. We're just gonna let that dry a bit. And you take your cup of water and go ahead and rinse your big brush off. Try to wipe off as much paint before you put it in the water. And we're just gonna rinse that real good and put it to the side. We're not really gonna use the big brush for the rest of the painting. It's just for that first part. So you can clean that, put it to the side. That way you can use it either for next time or whenever you want to paint on your own, you'll have your brush nice and clean, because once that paint dries in there, it doesn't come out. Right, so once you get your brush nice and clean, put that to the side. If your water is dirty, feel free to go dump that in the sink, or I have a big jar here, so I'm just gonna dump it in here and get fresh water. That way when I need to rinse my brush again, I don't have any muddy water streaks in there. All right, so we're just waiting for this to dry a little bit more. That way when we paint on top of it, we don't want the colors to mix. It's okay if it's a little bit wet still, but the next step is we're gonna take a small brush and some of the white paint, and you can take it straight out of the cup if you'd like to. I'm just gonna put mine on my little palette over here. And then we're going to start on the bottom left, and we're gonna paint a little clover. So how we're gonna do that is we're gonna start by making a little heart. We're gonna do it kind of point with the little point going downward. Paint our first heart. And then we're gonna go right across from that heart and paint another one to make our second clover leaf. And if your paint is still a little bit damp, as long as you don't press down your brush too much, it shouldn't mix the paint as much. Just gonna fill in those hearts that we outlined. And try not to use too much paint, that way it dries faster, because the more paint you put on there, the longer it's gonna take to dry. And then in between those two hearts on each side, we're gonna paint 2 more hearts. Kind of starts to look like a flower, and these are like the little petals. And then if you have to, because my brush is kind of turning gray, the black's mixing a little bit, you just wipe it off and get a little bit more of the white paint. It's okay, it doesn't have to be completely white because we're gonna put green over this. We're just painting a white base coat first. That way when we paint on the green, it's brighter and it pops more. We want our green to look nice and bright, but we also want the dark background. So we're gonna paint it in white first. All right, and then once you got your clover shape there, you can wipe off your brush a little bit. And what we're gonna do is paint more clovers, but we're not gonna do 4-leaf clovers in the background. We're gonna do little 3-leaf clovers. So instead of putting them in a square, we can paint a little line. So for mine, I like to do a little line like that. And a little line like that. Try to keep them the same distance apart. And I'm going to use those lines to be the center of my heart. So once I got that line there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of sketch out my heart. And the middle of my heart is going to end at the end of that line. Just kind of sketch it out. And what I'm doing is, instead of brushing it on, I'm just kind of poking my canvas. That way it only puts a little bit of paint on there. And that kind of helps me control where my paint's going, because if I brush it like that, maybe I'll go a little too far. So I'm just putting a little on at a time. That way I can get that shape that I want. And then once you have the outline of your first heart, go ahead and fill it in. And the cool thing about this one is everyone's is going to look different, because you can put as many clovers as you want, or maybe you just want a few. That's okay too. Everyone's will look unique and different. Once again, once you got your outline, you can just fill it in. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. It's always good to ask questions. All right. So since I have 2 big clovers already, I'm gonna try to do some little tiny ones. If you want to paint smaller stuff, you want just a tiny bit of paint on your brush, not too much, because once you squish it down, it's gonna move everywhere. So with just a little bit of paint, I'm gonna try to paint a tiny heart. And once you get used to making the shapes you won't need to draw those lines anymore. And especially with the tiny ones, it's easy to just kind of use that flat edge of your brush. Just bring it up and kind of inward, and only really moving one edge of your brush. So like this point is going to stay touching the canvas, and I'm just going to drag that other edge and bring it inward. It's kind of hard to see. If you make the first one too small and the leaves aren't close enough together, you can just kind of spread it out a little bit. And then just anywhere you have empty space, just put more clovers. And then if you feel like you put too much paint, like I feel like I went a little heavy on the paint on my big clover, just wipe off your brush and then kind of go over it again and even out the paint on this. I was going a bit fast, so I had a little bit too much paint on my big clover. So I'm just going to spread it out, that way it dries a little bit faster. All right, so you can do more clovers than this if you want to. I'm gonna stop there, that way I have time to dry it. All right, so mine is mostly dry now. So the next step is we're gonna make sure you have your brush rinsed. Get it nice and clean. And if you have a paper towel, I like to just dry it off, so that way it doesn't water down the paint. And we're gonna take our green paint, and you can either, again, take it straight from the cup or put it on your palette. I'm gonna put mine on my palette, and the first one we're gonna fill in is our big one, because we're gonna paint something on top of that. We want that one to dry first. So just wherever you painted your little white hearts, we're just gonna cover them in green now. And it's okay if you go over the white and a little bit onto the black. Just make sure you get all those little edges filled in. Now it's kind of like a coloring book. You don't have to draw the lines. We're just filling it in. Coloring in all these little clovers. So once you guys got your little clovers dry, mine's still a little bit wet, but I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna get the red ready. Make sure before you move on to the next color, rinse your brush really good. So we don't want that red mixing with that green, because when you mix red and green, you get brown. We're not trying to make a brown ladybug. Ladybugs are red. Make sure you dry your brush real good. Right. After we have our clover all dried, we're gonna go on that bottom left leaf of our clover, and we're just gonna paint a red circle. Doesn't have to be a perfect circle. I know mine wasn't. It's just gotta be kind of ladybug shaped. This one I found it's a bit easier to get a good amount of red on your brush. And don't press too hard, because my paint is still a little bit wet, but if you press lightly with the brush, it usually doesn't mix too much. We're just gonna go lightly over and paint a little circle. I like to do mine about half the size of the leaf itself. He's a little ladybug. And then once you have your little circle for your ladybug on there, that's all we really need of the red paint. So we're gonna go ahead and rinse our brush again. Right, so once we got our little red ladybug and got a little bit of black paint on our brush again, what we're gonna do is we're gonna paint his head. Let me get this closer. So I don't really paint a circle. I just kind of dab it right at the edge of that circle. And then I kind of make a little, almost like a round triangle shape. Oops, I got a little, not enough black paint on my brush. Yeah, because we want it a little bit pointed. Or like a semicircle, kind of like a semicircle. I could not think of the word. Then once we have that on there, all right, so with a little bit of paint, we're just gonna put the dots of our ladybug. I'm just gonna kind of, and taking some of the black off your brush so you have just a little bit, we're gonna use that thin edge of the brush and just kind of dab a line down the middle so that we can show the separation between the ladybug's wings. And then for the legs, we're gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna dab it once to make a little leg. Dab it again for the other little leg. Try to do so you can see. And just kind of poke your palette or poke your canvas with the brush. That way it leaves a little line. Mine got a little bit smudged because my paint's still a little bit wet. And you can always go back in with the very corner of our brush. Kind of drag that paint outward. Now once you finish your ladybug, if you want with the white paint, I forgot to put this in the guide, but you can give it little eyes. I forgot to give my ladybug eyes on my guide. So just go ahead and rinse your brush off. Get it nice and dry. And then take the tiniest bit of white on the corner of your brush. So just on the very corner. And then on the sides of his little head, just do one little dab and another little dab to give him some eyes. All right, so we're just about finished. Once you got your ladybug on there, you're good to go.